Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good morning to you, dear third year students. Welcome back again to our lecture 7, which is going to be about verbs and the verb phrase. Classification of English verbs. In terms of their functions in the verb phrase, the English verbs are classified into lexical verbs like walk, talk, speak, and break, and auxiliary verbs, which are divided into primary auxiliaries like do, have, and be, and modal auxiliaries like can, may, shall, will, could, might, should, would, ought to, must, used to, need, and dare. Forms of English verbs. Regular lexical verbs like call have four morphological forms. Irregular lexical verbs vary in this respect. A verb like speak has 5 forms, whereas cut has only 3 forms. However, the primary auxiliary verb be has 8 forms. So have a look on the table. We have the base form, the S form, the ing participle, the past form, and the ed participle. So if we take, for example, the verb call, the base form is call, the S form calls, the ing participle calling, the past form called, and the ed participle called. So as you see that the verb call has 4 morphological forms. Speak, speaks, speaking, spoke, spoken. So as you see, it has 5 morphological forms, whereas the verb cut has only 3. So cut, cuts, cutting, cut, cut. So as you see, there is no change in the past form and in the ed participle form, which are the same as the base form. So these verb forms have different functions in the finite and non-finite verb phrases. On this basis, the S form and the past form are called finite, whereas the ing participle and the ed participle are called non-finite. The base verb is sometimes finite and some other times non-finite. Finite verb phrases. Now, as you know, the finite verb phrases are those verb phrases whose verb element is capable of showing tense, aspect, mood, and voice. So all these 4 things, the verb should be capable of showing all these 4 things. Finite verb phrases may consist of just a finite verb, as in, he worked very hard. So this simple sentence has only one verb, which is the finite verb, which is capable of showing tense, which is the past tense here. Okay. In finite verb phrases consisting of more than one verb, the finite verb is the first. So sometimes we may have a finite verb phrase that consists of more than one verb. So which one of them is the finite verb? It is the first. The first one is the finite verb. Like when we say, he was working for a computer company at that time. The enemy's attack had been planned for 15 years. The finite verb is the element of the verb phrase which has a present or past tense. This is a very simple rule that if the sentence has more than one verb, okay, the finite verb is the first, and which is capable of showing the past or a present difference. So it shows tense. In the sentences above, the finite verbs are was and had. Okay, was refers to the past and had refers to the past. So this verb element shows what shows the present or past. Okay, so it shows, they both of them show the past tense. Whereas the verbs working and had been planned in the same above examples are non-finite verb forms, but they function in finite verb phrases. So was working and had been planned. The whole verb phrase is finite, although it has some verbs that are non-finite. So a non-finite verb phrase can also function in a finite verb phrase. Okay, they can function in a finite verb phrase. However, the whole verb phrase is considered as a finite verb phrase because the first element, okay, is capable of showing tense difference. There is usually number concord, so there is an agreement between the subject and the finite verb. Okay, this agreement is in terms of number. So if we have singular, so then the verb should take a singular verb form. If we have a plural subject, then the verb should take a plural verb form. So such concord is restricted to contrast between the third person singular and other persons. The third person singular and other persons. So like when we say I or we, you, and they read. Okay, so these are the other persons. So we have I, the first person, okay, and we also the first person plural, you the second person, and they the third person plural. So when we use them, we use plural verb form, read. Whereas in the third person singular, now we use the S form of the verb. Okay, that's in the present simple, of course. So like we say, she or he reads. Concord of person between the subject and the finite verb is particularly clear with the verbs to be. So with the verbs to be, we have a person concord between the subject and the verb, and this is clearly seen with the verbs to be. So like we say, I am, you are, he is. So here we have what is called person concord. Now, let's come to non-finite verb phrases. We said earlier that non-finite verb phrases are those phrases whose verbs are not capable of showing tense and mood. However, they are capable of showing aspect and voice. So they lack the capability of showing tense. So we cannot tell whether the tense of the phrase is in the present, in the past, in the future. Okay, we can't tell. Okay, however, we can tell whether the verb phrase refers to the active voice or the passive voice, whether it is in the perfective aspect or it is in the progressive aspect. So the non-finite forms of the verb are, we have four forms. The bare infinitive, like call, the infinitive with to, of course, like to call, the to infinitive, and the ing participle calling, and the ed participle called. Of course, now I'm speaking about the regular English verbs. Of course, the irregular ones also, they have these forms. So, for example, when we have speak, to speak, okay, is speaking, and the ed participle we say was spoken. Okay, so it refers to the ed participle, although it is irregular. We may use this to refer to the irregular English verbs. The non-finite verb phrases are mainly used as the verb element in the subordinate clauses. So the main use of the non-finite verb phrases is in subordinate clauses. So they might not be used in the main clauses. We use them in the subordinate clauses. Okay, so like after having spent 6 hours at the hospital, they eventually came home. He left the party and went home, not having anyone to talk to. To see all the detail, you have to look at the picture really carefully. If accepted by the parliament, the budget will lead to disastrous consequences. As you may have noticed in the sentences above, first, the non-finite verb phrases represent the verb element in the subordinate clauses. So they are used as the verb element in the subordinate clauses. Okay, so they are not used in the main clauses. Now, what do you mean by a subordinate clause? A subordinate clause is that dependent clause that cannot stand alone with a complete meaning. So it needs to be attached to a main clause to complete its meaning. So I cannot say, for example, after having spent 6 hours at the hospital and I stop, the meaning here is incomplete unless I attach it to the main clause. So unless I say after having spent 6 hours at the hospital, they eventually came home. So we have a complete meaning since we attach the subordinate clause to the main clause. Okay. Number 2, the subordinate clauses in which they are used are subjectless. So usually the subordinate clauses where we use the non-finite verb phrases usually are subjectless. They don't have subject. This does not mean that all non-finite subordinate clauses are subjectless. Some may come with subjects. If it comes with no subject, the subject of the subordinate clause is usually the same as the subject of the main clause. So we can recover the subject of the non-finite clause by looking at the subject of the main clause, okay, which they can be the same. Okay, they can be the same as that of the main clause. So after having spent 6 hours at the hospital, they eventually came home. So it means what? The subject of the first subordinate clause after having spent 6 hours at the hospital is the same as that of the main clause they. So after they have spent 6 hours at the hospital, they eventually came home. So it is the same subject of the main clause. Some non-finite subordinate clauses come with subordinators like after, if, in sentences 1 and 4, while some of them are subordinator free like sentences 2 and 3. So sometimes they come with subordinators, other times they do not come with subordinators. Now, if they come with subordinators, this makes things easier for us to recover the meaning of the subordinate clause. We know the kind of relation that holds between the subordinate clause and the main clause. Like in the first one, after having spent 6 hours at the hospital, they eventually came home. What kind of relationship here we have? We have what? A time relationship, and it is clear from the subordinator after. So after they have spent 6 hours at the hospital. Now if we want to interpret the non-finite clause in terms of a finite one, if we want to change the non-finite verb phrase into a finite one, so we say after they have spent 6 hours at the hospital, they eventually came home. Number 2, he left the party and went home, not having anyone to talk to. Now, do we have a subordinator here? We don't have a subordinator. So if you want to change the non-finite verb phrase, okay, the non-finite clause, not having anyone to talk to, if you want to change it into a finite one, first you need to find the subordinator, the correct subordinator. So you have to look at the kind of relationship that holds between the main clause, he left the party and went home, and the subordinate clause, not having anyone to talk to. So what kind of relationship here? So as you may tell, the relationship is that of cause and effect. Cause and effect. So we can say he left the party and went home because he did not have anyone to talk to. Okay, because he did not have anyone to talk to. So it is what a kind of, cause and effect relationship. Okay, the same thing applies for the other, sentences. Now let's move to speak about the combinations of verbs. I said earlier, right away from the beginning of our lectures, I said something about the combinations of verbs. So the verb element is always a verb phrase. This may be finite, showing tense, mood, aspect, and voice, or non-finite, not showing tense or mood, but still capable of showing aspect and voice. Whether finite or non-finite, the verb phrase can consist of one word or more than one word, in which case the verb phrase consists of a head verb preceded by one or more auxiliary verbs, as it is indicated by the four basic verb combinations rules below. So you remember the rules that we talked about them earlier. We said that we have four basic rules, which are the rules for the modal verbs. Okay, so we have what? A modal plus infinitive, as in we can do nothing. So a modal plus infinitive, can do. So the modal and the infinitive. The second rule, perfective, is that of the perfective, the perfect. So we have one of the verbs to have plus the past participle, as in he had forgotten their wedding anniversary. And the third rule is that of the progressive, like we have what? One of the forms of the verbs to be plus the ing form of the verb, as in the wind is growing stronger. And the last one is that of the passive. So we have a form of the verb be plus the past participle, as in he was challenged rudely. These four basic verb combination rules may also combine with each other to make up longer strings of verbs in one single verb phrase, as illustrated in the next slide. So these four basics, we say they may combine with each other to make up longer strings of verbs, okay, in the verb phrase. So we may combine rule A and rule B. So we have the rule of the modal plus infinitive and the rule of the perfective. We have a plus the past participle. So we may combine them together. So like we say, he must have typed the report. He must have typed the report. How many verbs do we have here in the verb phrase? We have three verbs. Now, of course, must here is the modal, plus have is the infinitive, and typed is the past participle. So as you see, the verb in the middle, have, works as the infinitive for the previous rule, for the modal rule, and it works as the first element of the second rule, which is that of the perfective. So that's why we have three verbs. We can have a combination of rule A and rule C, so that of the modal and that of the progressive. So we say he may be typing at the moment. He may be typing at the moment. And we can have also rule A plus D. So that of the modal plus that of the passive. So we say the report could be typed by Jane. The report could be typed by Jane. So we have, in this case, we have the rule of the passive. We can use the rule of the passive only if the verb is a transitive one. Okay, so this is what a restriction. So the rule of the passive cannot be used unless we have a transitive verb. We can also have a combination of rule B plus rule C, that of the perfective and that of the progressive. So we can say he has been typing all morning. We can also have a combination of rule B plus rule D, like we say the report has been typed already, and we can have a combination of rule C plus rule D, like when we say the report is being sent to the FBI. We can have a longer string of verbs in the verb phrase, so like when we say we can have the rule of the modal plus the rule of the perfective and the rule of the progressive. So like when we say he must have been typing the report himself. So as you see, we have four verbs. He must have been typing the report himself. And we can have rule A, rule B, rule D. So like we say, the reports must have been typed by the secretary. So as you see, we have this long string of verbs in the verb phrase. You may have a look at this diagram. Now, as you can see, the verbs in the middle, so like, have and like been, these verbs in the middle serve both as the second part of the previous combination. So like if we take have here, for example, it serves as the second part of the rule of the modal and as the first part of the following combination, and it is the first part of the rule of the perfective. So must have been typing. So have here functions as or works as the second part of rule A and as the first part of rule B. Okay, been here functions as the second part of rule B and the first part of rule C. Okay, so this is the way we think about the combinations of verbs. Okay, that's all for today, and thank you for joining me, and I wish you all the best of luck. Goodbye.